Hey, this is Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein, and today we're going to talk about indemnifications. What are they, why are they important, and what should you watch out for? What does indemnification mean, or indemnify? According to Merriam-Webster, it is about securing or making compensation to another person or entity for a hurt, loss, or damage. So what we're talking about is kind of like insurance. What you're doing is someone else is damaged in some way, and you're making up for it. You're compensating them for that hurt, loss, or damage. So why should you have an indemnification clause in a contract? Why does anyone want one? The idea here is that one side versus the other has information, has control over something that's happening in this transaction, in this business deal, in this situation, that the other side doesn't have. And it makes sense, it's just fair for the side that has control, for the side that has the information, to be responsible if something goes wrong. For example, let's say you hire someone to write a blog post for your website. Now, if you hire that person to write that blog post, you're assuming that they're going to write it themselves. But let's say instead of writing it themselves, they just steal it from some random person on the internet. They plagiarize. They are committing copyright infringement. And then they give that blog post to you. You innocently put it on your website. And what happens? You get a cease and desist letter from the person who actually owns the copyright over that content. You're in trouble, but you're not the one who actually did the original copyright infringement. You're still committing it, copyright infringement, because you posted it on your website, but you didn't even know. That's the idea of having an indemnification clause. The person who actually did the wrong thing, who had control over the situation, is the one who's responsible to defend you in court, to pay the damages. Whatever happened in that situation, the person who committed the action is the one who has to pay for it. So what do indemnification clauses look like? This is the indemnification clause that's part of YouTube's terms of service. So it applies to any of you who are watching this on YouTube or who are creators of YouTube videos, where you're indemnifying YouTube against any damage that you cause to them. So typically it looks like this, and this says, to the extent permitted by applicable law, because there are limits to how much you can indemnify someone. You agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless. Now, interestingly enough, hold harmless and is the same thing as indemnify, so I don't actually put both of those phrases in any of my agreements, but YouTube does. Hold harmless YouTube, its affiliates, officers, directors, employees, and agents from any and all claims, damages, obligations, losses, liabilities, costs, or debt and expenses, including but not limited to attorney's fees. This is something to be aware of, is that an indemnification clause, you might not just be liable to somebody to compensate them for damages that they've received, but also to pay for a lawyer to defend them in a lawsuit. And sometimes that can be the most expensive thing involved here. And this is for any damages that arise from your use and access to the service. So even if you're just a user, your violation of any term of this agreement, like above it has terms where you agree to not post anything that infringes someone else's copyright or trademark, your violation of any third-party right, including without limitation copyright, property, or privacy right. So you post something that is copyright infringement, you post something that infringes on the privacy of somebody, talking about that, and YouTube gets sued, or any claim that your content causes damages to a third party. So that's pretty much, anything that causes damage. That kind of gets everything else. This defense and indemnification obligation will survive this agreement and your use of service. So even if you quit YouTube right now, never use YouTube again, you still have agreed to indemnify the giant entity of YouTube, which is, of course, Google, against any harm that you cause to them that is defined by this indemnification agreement. There are a lot of limits and qualifications that you can have to an indemnification clause. You can have pieces in it that limit damages to only certain types of damages. You can have pieces in it that say who gets to control the lawsuit, who has the right to participate in the lawsuit. And you can also have things in there that says whether or not you have to pay for it as you go or just pay at the end. What I mean is, let's say that you're the person who wrote the article and you don't think it is copyright infringement. Well, you probably want to be involved in what's going on so the other side doesn't just say, yes, I will pay you $3,000 of damages, and you actually have to write the check. So there are other aspects of indemnification that can be negotiated. Now, with an indemnification clause, you have to be clear. It has to be specific that you're actually doing that indemnification. It's not something that's going to happen most likely automatically. Courts are very specific about that. Also, typically you don't have to indemnify against someone else doing things that are illegal. So there are limitations to how indemnification clauses work that have been enforced by courts. One of the ways that you can negotiate an indemnification clause, especially if both sides are relatively equal, you're both small business owners, for example, is to have them go both ways. So you're indemnifying the other side against everything that you promised, all the warranties that you gave in the contract, any representations that you may have made, and the other side is doing the same for you. If the indemnification goes both ways, it makes it a lot easier to get both sides to agree. The bottom line is always look for indemnification clauses in a contract. You don't want to be indemnifying somebody else unless you know that you're doing it and you're the one who actually has control over the situation, over what's happening that you're going to have to indemnify someone against. On the flip side, there are situations where somebody else is doing something completely out of your control, you're not monitoring what they're doing, and you need them to protect you. Again, this is Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein. If you have any questions about indemnifications, go ahead and post them below in the comments. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the like button. And of course, if you like any other tips about small business law or other intellectual property issues, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.